today I'm going to be talking about the work that we carry out in our 9 locations at the moment, as well as our national campaigns. We have a very specific approach to animal advocacy. We're very numbers-based thinkers. We try to squeeze out as much efficacy from all of our campaigns that we can. So every time that we're spending $1 or spending an hour trying to help animals, we want to make sure that we're doing the most good possible, that we're changing lives for the largest number of animals, we're reducing the largest amount of suffering possible, and that we're saving the most lives. So each of our offices carries out 3 different core programs. The first is veg outreach. So this is things you're probably familiar with, like passing out booklets with information on vegan eating and factory farming on all the campuses now in the Georgia area. Our local director, Chris, will be doing that. We have a humane education program, which is where we go into dozens and dozens of high school classrooms in each of our cities each year and give an hour-long lecture to high school students about factory farming. We show them footage. We talk to them about vegetarian eating. We give them supplementary literature. We find this to be a very effective way to get young people involved in the movement, start changing their diets. And finally, we have our anti-cruelty campaigns. And this is where we kind of turn away from working with individuals to change their diets, and instead we look towards large corporations, large institutions, and colleges and so forth, and get them to change their policies in ways that affect millions and millions of animals each year. Just to name a few of our victories, here are some of the organizations in the last 2 years that we've gotten to make sweeping changes of reform for animals, including Johnsonville Sausage, the largest sausage company in the country, Harvard University, Aramark and Sodexo and Centerplate. Together, all of them make up the vast majority of any corporate catering. IKEA now has vegan meatballs. They're boycotting Battery Cage egg farms. I'm sure you guys know Au Bon Pain, the cafe chain, and Unilever, the 2nd largest consumer company in the world, is now funding research to sex eggs in the egg industry so that male chicks aren't born and then killed on the first day of their lives. So that has the potential to end the killing of half of the animals used in the egg industry. Because of our specific approach, the organization Animal Charity Evaluators ranks us as one of the 2 best charities in the country after looking at the top 100 charities. And it's because we have this specific approach that I'm going to be talking with you about today. So that brings me to the central question of this talk. Why is it that we should be so focused on impact, on efficacy, rather than just following that old idea of just do something, do anything, as long as I'm already vegan, I'm putting it out there, I'm putting positive energy into the world, I'm doing enough? Well, the fact of the matter is, the situation for farm animals is very, very dire. This infographic from animalcharityevaluators.org represents all of the animals that are abused and killed by humans, so every non-wild animal. And if you see here in the far corner, we've got lab animals and all the cats and dogs living in shelters and all the animals used for clothing like fur and leather. And together they make up about 1% of the animals that humans kill. The other 99% of animals are being raised on farms for our food. So the first thing that we can glean from this information is that if we want to have a really big impact for animals, and I think a lot of us are here because we care about animals, we want to reduce animal suffering, we know that working on promoting vegetarianism and veganism and meat production and so forth, changing the lives of these farm animals is by far going to have the biggest impact by several orders of magnitude. The second infographic I want to show with you guys, I think, is both good and bad news. What these red globes represent is just the advertising budget annually of the major meat producers and meat sellers in America. So that means just specifically the money that's earmarked for focus groups and designers for packaging and for salespeople and so forth. You know, the people who are directly working with consumers and telling them that milk comes from happy cows and that animals are treated humanely at Purdue and so forth. These little green globes in the corner represent the entire budget of every mainstream animal group that even mentions farm animals. So we're talking salary, insurance money, all the overhead, all the other campaigns like at HSUS and PETA. They obviously don't only focus on farm animals, so their slivers covering farm animals are even smaller. So the bad news is it's clearly a David and Goliath situation. But what the really good news is that even though we are so tiny in comparison to the people who are out there putting animals on factory farms, we're seeing an enormous reduction in the amount of meat that people are eating. We're seeing a spike in the number of people who are vegetarian and vegan. And we know that a lot of this change comes from folks just like you guys in the audience going out and doing some of the things that we're going to talk about today, changing people's hearts and minds about animals on farms. So I'm going to have two different parts to my talk today. First, we're going to talk about institutional campaigns and big corporate change that the Humane League gets. And then in the second part, I'm going to talk a little bit about the one-on-one outreach that we do. So we have a 3 or 4 person team, depending on the campaign, that works on these big national targets, right? Every day we've got 2 or 3 ongoing corporate campaigns. And step 1 of these institutional campaigns is we need to set a firm goal. You can't just go out there and say, I'm going to target McDonald's, and my ask is stop hurting animals, and we'll see what they do. We'll see how we can move the ball forward a little bit. We want to be incredibly specific in our ask. We want to tell them this is exactly the thing that we would like you to do. And when we determine what that ask is, we have a very kind of bottom line, we call it, way of thinking. Just like an investment banker, right? When you invest money in stocks, you want to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck. We feel the exact same way. When we spend our money on campaigns and our time, we want to make sure that when we win, it's the best possible campaign that we could have done, right? We've maximized the number of animals that we're helping. So we have 3 metrics that we look at the Humane League. The first is the severity of the suffering. So, for example, we work a lot on getting large institutions, although we're a vegan group, of course, to boycott battery cage egg farms. And the reason for that is that, it's kind of a consensus among animal scientists that egg-laying hens who are confined in battery cages probably lead the worst lives of animals on farms. They're essentially unable to spread their wings, they grip onto wire, and they live for a very long time. They live for about a year inside these cages, unable to really move more than an inch or so. So we know that it's incredibly severe suffering. We also know that there's a huge number of animals impacted. So for example, right now we're campaigning on UGA's campus. They're a giant school with tens of thousands of students. Just getting them to make a switch, just one institution, will literally impact thousands and thousands of hens over the coming years. So there are very few campaigns where you can have a really, really big impact for animals on that scale outside of the farm animal world. And finally, vulnerability. And this is perhaps the most important piece of the puzzle. Is this a campaign that can be won? The reason that right now we're stuck doing these cage-free campaigns is that if I go and meet with the dining team at UGA, and I say, hey, have you guys thought about having a vegan campus without any kinds of eggs? They're just going to laugh in my face. We're not going to be able to get student support for this and that kind of thing. So you need to make sure that this is the most important component. And is anyone here familiar with Henry Spira? In a lot of ways, he's kind of like the godfather of the animal rights movement in the States. And he was just a lone guy in New York City, and he has this huge, or he had it, unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but this laundry list of giant institutional campaigns that he won just by himself. And Peter Singer wrote a book about him and the work that he did. And this was the most important lesson, he said, that he included in his book. He said, if you're an activist and you're about to start a campaign, you're about to start doing outreach, you have to ask yourself every day, will it work? Obviously we're all here because we want to see a world where animals are treated with compassion, where they're not suffering on farms. But of course, this is going to be a piecemeal process. I think we all probably know vegan activists who are kind of like this cat. As hard as they try, they're just never going to achieve their goal, right? This cat did not ask himself, will it work? So I just want to illustrate this point, right? So who here in this room wants to end cruelty to animals? All right, great. I've given talks like this around as a general consensus among the folks at VegFest. So I think this is our goal. At the end of the day, all of our campaigns are leading towards this goal right here. But of course, that's a tough campaign for us to wage. Put up a change.org petition, let's end all animal cruelty. It's going to be tough to really measure our success. So where do we start? Well, one big chunk of cruelty to animals, of course, is factory farming. So we're going to hone in a little bit. We know we're going to talk about factory farming. This is where the vast majority of animals who are suffering are stuck on these crowded farms in terrible conditions. Okay, so let's talk, let's hone in a little bit. That's still obviously ending factory farming, tough campaign to win. What about ending battery cages? Well, we're seeing now, last year, unfortunately it didn't push all the way through, but we're seeing compromise bills being put out by egg producers. They're going to start phasing out terrible battery cages and so forth. But for folks like you and I, that's also a tough campaign, ending all battery cages across the country at once. So what do? We need to kind of shift our focus on what's winnable, what's vulnerable, what's still going to have a big impact for animals. So banning battery cages across the US, that's going to be tough. Banning battery cages in my state, now that's something more of a reasonable goal. That's something that we can actually work towards within a few years. And we're going to lay the foundation by banning battery cage eggs on UGA's campus to start, and then every campus, and then the major food producers, and the major caterers in the county, and so forth. So this is the way we approach things. You know, we always have that end goal in mind that we all share. We want to end animal cruelty. We want to make more and more vegans. We want to change, you know, the face of agriculture in the States. And we're going to do it by winning the campaigns that are winnable with the biggest impact. So we've set our goal. Step 2, you have to engage your target. When we go to companies, we provide them with these things. First, we come to them with a solution. We say, we're about to wage a campaign against you, whether it's we're going to be, you know, gathering signatures outside of each one of your locations, talking to your customers about why you support cruelty to animals. If we're talking with Johnsonville Sausage, what we did was reach out to every retailer that carries Johnsonville Sausage, who are firm supporters of gestation crates, these 2-foot by 7-foot cages where pigs can't even turn around, and they openly support these crates. So we just reached out to literally every major retailer in the country that sold Johnsonville products, shared this information with them, gave them a list of other suppliers, said please boycott them. They won't even come to the table with animal cruelty groups. And we went to Johnsonville at the same time and said, listen, we are going to keep making your life miserable. This will just get worse. Here's what you can do to make it stop. You simply put a statement on your website saying that you will boycott all farms that use gestation crates. And we know that over time, the more companies that do this, it will essentially end the practice in the States, as it's already been done in Europe, which of course, you know, pigs in gestation crate-free farms are still in hell, but at the end of the day, if I had a choice of whether I could turn around and move around in group housing, it's a night and day difference. We also like to offer to work together with them. We'll say, hey, now we're your enemy, but if you do what we want, we can be your friend. We can write a press release for you. We can tell the retailers that you, unlike other groups, listen, and then we'll go after your competitors. Great for business, right? And I cannot stress this enough, whether you're talking to your dining person on campus about adding vegan options, or whether you're talking to, you know, a giant company like Unilever, you have to be very, very clear. These business people are mostly just that, business people. They're not invested in animal cruelty. They don't think about these issues, really. You just need to make it very clear for them. Here's the problem. This is exactly what we want you to do. We can even provide you with the language, and here's how you make the campaign stop. All right, now the fun part. So once we've engaged them and said, here's what we want you to do, and they say no, this is when we start adding the pressure. So I'll share with you now some of the tactics that the Humane League uses that maybe you can use in your personal life. So there's a wide variety of things you can do out there, right? I'm going to start by talking about the carrot, right? The carrot and the stick, of course. The carrot is when we try to bribe people to do something, when we're kind to people and give positive encouragement, hoping that they'll make the change for animals that we want to see. One example of a very successful kindness-based campaign, if you will, is that of our Meatless Monday campaigns. This is from our website for the Boston schools, who just last month announced that they will be, because of the Humane League's campaign, doing Meatless Monday, serving 100% vegetarian meals in all the Boston schools, which means every year, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of meals that would have had, you know, factory farm chicken nuggets will now be vegetarian. So unlike these big corporations where we just start off as a bully and kind of going after them really aggressively, the dining team at the Boston schools, like, no one's going to benefit by us picking on them, right? They have a tough job. Everyone hates the lunch lady, all right? They really do have it hard, and they also have a million regulations they have to deal with, hoops they have to jump through. So we know that they have a pretty tough life. They have to work with budgets. No one's really happy with them. There's lots of angry parents. So instead of, just piling on and making them feel isolated from us, we do the exact opposite. We show up to meetings with tons of vegan muffins. And this website for Meatless Monday at Boston Schools is super positive. We have a video of school kids and their parents being interviewed talking about how much they'd love to see this change, how great it would be, how awesome it would be to see the Boston schools become more sustainable and so forth. Here's the petition side. And you can see there's a comment section. So we get comments from hundreds of parents saying, please do this. I'd love to see you do this. We forward these on to the dining team, kind of piecemeal, one at a time, to make them feel great, feel like it's a good idea. We get coverage in the local news system for it, like this. We also recently got the Philadelphia school system to make the same commitment. When we get positive press coverage like this for a dining team, I mean, is anyone here familiar with the Philadelphia city politics? Let's just say the school system is not doing very well, it's not very popular. So for us to provide them with hey, here's some great coverage of you doing something sustainable, something people, giving vegetables to kids is not a tough sell, right? Like, this makes you look pretty good. So this is pretty much the opposite of our typical campaign. We even have like a viral thing we do online where we target the Twitter accounts and so forth of these folks, and we put up pictures like these. These are all high school students. We go outside the high school with these boards. I support Meals Monday in Charlotte schools, and we have them all write it out. Once we have more than 100 of the pictures, we print them in a nice picture book. We give one to each person on the dining staff to say, look how much kids want this. And we found this to be incredibly effective. In the last 6 months, we got 3 school systems, Boston, half of Baltimore County, and Philadelphia to switch. Each year, that's 3.2 million meals served on Mondays that will be vegetarian. Just from these I mean, there's no one in this room that couldn't do all of these things themselves. Very simple. And, like I said before, after you win, you want to follow up with a lot of positive press coverage like this. But this is boring, right? We're all here to talk about the stick. This is why, at least I got into activism, the fun stuff. And this is where things get interesting. So, I mentioned before Johnsonville sausage. Here is the petition page that we put up for them. We put together like a 4-minute video, footage of gestation crates from undercover investigations. We know that this supplier actually supplied this in this video supplies Johnsonville sausage, and we just started spreading that on social media, spreading it to everyone that purchases Johnsonville sausage, like Target, Walmart, Kroger, Safeway, and so on and so on and so on. And through a Change.org petition, we got almost 75,000 signatures, and we share that with the supermarkets and say, if you folks don't get on board, we're going to share with these 73,000 consumers that you are pro-animal cruelty and so forth. Here's our website. So this is our Fidelity campaign. Fidelity is, of course, a joint investment firm. They invest in Seaboard pork. So this is another tactic, right? Rather than going after Seaboard, who in this room knows about Seaboard? Probably almost no one, right? That's because Seaboard is just like the name of the company that supplies a million different brands with their labels on it. So we can't really campaign against Seaboard because consumers, if they're boycotting Seaboard, wouldn't know what to buy. So instead, we went after their biggest investor, Fidelity, and basically put together a video that says, if you use Fidelity investments, part of your money is going to support cruelty like this that you see in the video. And within 48 hours of this website going up, the lead counsel at Fidelity called me on my cell phone, brought in a specialist from the Humane Society to present to all of their investors about why gestation crates are bad. And that was fairly recently, but we're hoping to see in the coming months an updated policy where they're not investing in this kind of cruelty. Another thing that's fairly obvious, but it actually works, is phone call campaigns. We really live in like the iPhone era right now. Everyone texts, everyone emails. I don't know, like, do you guys get stressed when you get a phone call? Anyone in this room, especially maybe the younger people? It's just an unusual thing now to get a phone call. So when a PR department at one of these like farm companies that probably gets like 1 phone call a week, all of a sudden gets like 500 phone calls in one day from consumers asking them questions, it is very stressful. We found this to be one of the most effective pressure tactics you can use. Just get a dozen people to start making phone calls each day. It is incredibly obnoxious. The other thing you can do is you can just wait outside of a Whole Foods with the cell phone. We've had volunteers do this and just ask people to come out, get them to sign a signature on the petition and say, hey, do you have a minute? Do you just want to call for me real quick? And you can start racking them up very quickly that way. What got Johnsonville to switch? Like I said, we reached out to all their retailers. It was these 3 folks getting in touch with them and saying, why is this coming across my desk? And when you hear from the purchaser at Costco and Target at Walmart, it tends to make you act pretty quickly. So within 24 hours of that going out, they updated their website with their new policy. All right, so now you've won your campaign, right? It's time to follow up. This is my personal favorite, is after we've harassed one of these companies for a long time and made them grind their teeth and have these very upsetting phone calls with us, and they finally do what we want. I like to be as gracious and kind as possible. I remember we had this really bitter campaign against Harvard University to do cage-free. After they switched, I brought their dining director and president these big bouquets of flowers and vegan chocolates, and just gave them so much praise and thank you notes that were signed by all the volunteers who worked on the campaign. And it feels great, but it also is a good way to kind of ingratiate them, to kind of smooth things over. And in the future, when you go back to them, they'll know, A, they're not actually bad people. They just, they have a cause they care about, and once they've won, they're not going to be antagonistic. And also, it paves the way for future change. So one example, volunteers at Boston University, got them to go cage-free. 2 weeks later, they went back, the same group that had just, reached out to a bunch of their donors and gotten them to stop donating over the issue and so forth, so not on great terms. They went back and said, we'd love to see more vegan options, and they said, okay, just please don't hurt us. And now at BU, every single egg station has a separate tofu omelet station that was not there before, and they have like 7 dining halls. So you can see that you can really ratchet it up once you start going. And like I said before, when I was talking, that sliding scale of what we're trying to do, each one of these little victories is a stepping stone to something bigger. We don't stop at cage-free eggs. The next step is Meals Mondays, and then more vegan options. But you really can't start unless you are picking a victory that you can actually go for. So just to illustrate this point, in our Boston office, we've got a large number of schools. Obviously, these aren't all Boston schools, but like BU, Harvard, and so forth. We've had this campus campaign going on for a long time. We've gotten over 100 schools to go to cage-free. In Boston, we got, these guys are centered in Boston, they're all over the country, to do cage-free. Then, after that campaign, we went after Aramark and Sodexo. These are the people that run dining at colleges. We got them to make commitments to switch as well, and it was only because we had campaigned at 100 of their smaller accounts that they were able to switch. So we go from these local accounts to then we just get all the schools by getting the national account. After we did that, because we had laid this groundwork of all these campaigns, I went in front of the state legislator in Massachusetts and spoke on behalf of this bill to ban battery cages in the state. Unfortunately, it didn't pass last year, but of course we're going to try again. It had an overwhelming positive vote. It simply wasn't voted on because of large donations made by the Farm Bureau. But you can see here how this progress works, right? Without laying the groundwork of doing the small local campaigns, and then the large corporate campaigns, and then we get the statewide campaigns, and once we get a lot of states to start banning, then we'll see a national ban, the thing we're looking for. And once battery cages are out, we move on to the next thing, the next most cruel thing, and we just don't stop. You have to be completely relentless. So that's the basic approach we have to our institutional campaigns. Now, before we Q&A, I briefly want to touch on our outreach campaigns. And really, this is the heart and soul of what the Humane League does. And this is what I hope after this talk today and after getting inspired by the people you meet at VegFest, that you go out there and get involved with yourselves. So, our favorite form of outreach is leafleting. Has anyone in this room leafleted before? All right, awesome. This is killer. So, leafleting is an incredibly effective way to spread the message of factory farms, right? To spread about the plight of the suffering of these animals and to change people's diets. The Humane League has a separate section called Humane League Labs, where we do follow-up survey research, get data on how people change their diets after we've given them leaflets. And we found that, it's kind of a rough science, but roughly for every 2 leaflets we're handing out, about 1 vegetarian meal will come from that, given like the long-term diet change that we see. And it's not uncommon to go to a school. For example, I was at UGA on Wednesday, and my friend Chris and I, just the 2 of us, handed out, I think it was like 1,500 leaflets. The second form of outreach that folks can get involved with locally is humane education. Here I am in a high school classroom talking to students about factory farming, about how they can get involved by choosing more vegetarian and vegan meals. And we've just started this program this month in Georgia. So if anyone has connections to schools, or if you're a student in a school, whether it's high school or college, who might be interested in bringing one of our speakers, please stop at the Humane League's table. It's completely free. We bring literature, we have video, etc. Now, before Q&A, I really want to underline how easy and important it is that people get involved with this kind of work. So let's say you are leafleting, right? You have a good conversation with someone, and they go through the literature. If all you're able to do is to convince that person, for the next year, every other time you're going to order a chicken meal, you're going to order a vegetarian meal, right? This is a very small ask to make of someone. It's not really a big, I think everyone, whether or not you're vegan or hardcore meat eater, right? You can imagine doing that. It's not a big deal. That will save 14 birds every year. 14 birds will be spared a lifetime of suffering on a factory farm. I want you to imagine what conversation you can have with someone, what small change you could ask of someone, like use more sustainable light bulbs or something like that, that would have such an impact. It would reduce so much suffering. And that's just if you get one person to do it. But if you go out with us to one of the campuses nearby and you start handing out tons and tons of leaflets, it won't be long before you make your first vegetarian, which spares about 31 land animals each year, a little over 200 fish and shellfish as well. So let's say that you get that after your first few hundred leaflets. Maybe you've been leafleting for a few months at this point, or a few weeks, you've gone out a bunch of times with us. Well, now you've made 4 vegetarians. So now on top of the animals you're saving each year, you're saving all of these animals every single year. These are, each individual here is a lifetime of suffering and a brutal death. I mean, the moral urgency could not be more real, right? And this is unreal, the results that you can get. Just by going out, handing out booklets, being friendly, having conversations with folks. Of course, after a few more months, it's starting to look like this, maybe after a year. I mean, I think you guys get the idea, but this is real. I mean, this could be you. Starting tomorrow, if you want to start volunteering with us, volunteering with groups like Vegan Outreach or Mercy for Animals, all doing really high impact stuff, this could be you. These could be the animals that you personally have saved every year from literally a lifetime of suffering. And, of course, as everyone knows in this room, these animals are not just statistics. These are creatures with nervous systems and brains and things that they want to do and things that they don't want to do. Things that are important to them, animals that fear being hurt and that live in terrible conditions every single day. This friendly guy up here, Chris Gwynn, is the Atlanta director for the Humane League. He's the dude who organizes all of our volunteers. He makes leafleting really fun. He's over at our table in the middle of the middle aisle of the Veg Fest. Please sign up with him. This is Erica, one of our volunteers from a few weeks ago out leafleting. And I'm just going to end this talk by showing you, here's one young man, Adrian, who got involved via the Humane League and started leafleting. And these are all college students this semester who say that they're going vegetarian or vegan because they got one of our leaflets on their campus. This is real. This is just a few months' work from one guy. And this is just a small selection. And of course, these are just the people that talk to us, right? So, I thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to leave this up. This is Chris's contact info. If you don't have time to stop by the table, please get in touch with him. I'm also going to hand out this sign-up sheet for anyone who wants to get involved. So before Q&A, I'll just pass this around. I'm going to start here. Excellent. All right. So do we have a mic for Q&A that's going to be passed around? Awesome. Thanks again, guys.
Okay, we're ready for questions.
Hi, my name is Kyle, and I'm with the Ethical Food Association at Florida State University. I'm the co-president. We try to get better food on campus, more ethically sourced food, and Aramark is our supplier on campus.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so my question is, when we try to work with them, we get a lot of resistance. What's the best way to combat them? Is it with the stick or the carrot, or how exactly would you go about doing
Our
that?
nickname for Aramark at the Humane League, not joking, is the ancient enemy, is how we refer to them. Both myself and Chris, our Atlanta director, worked for Aramark in our college cafeteria years ago when we were in school together. So this is very near and dear to my heart. Aramark has the largest number of schools in the country, so we've campaigned probably against like 50 or 60 of their accounts, and they are by far the most aggressively anti-change. That said, within the last 2 years, they've gone from that to having their own booklet for dining directors on how to implement Meatless Mondays. So even them, even the worst of the worst, are being pushed towards our side of things. So, like I said, we've gotten a national commitment from them, so all their shell eggs are now cage-free, and we're going to be pushing them for their liquid eggs as well soon. The best Aramark account I've seen is at Boston University. They have a really awesome veg club there, and I'll just tell you a little bit about their success, because that might give you a good idea of what you can do. Essentially what they've done is they ran a very aggressive campaign at first, like I said, to kind of show, we mean business, you can't just blow us off. We're going to organize against you if you don't want to work with us. But they're also incredibly involved. The students show up and meet with the purchasing people consistently, talk to them about where they're getting their food, and they've actually become really engaged with the dining staff. So one thing I'd recommend doing is try to just set up meetings with them, get to know them, try to make friends with them, and you can get a lot going your way using the carrot in that sense. Outside of that, doing a Meatless Mondays campaign is something I recommend, is something they're doing at VU now. And essentially what that is, it's not targeting Aramark with we want you to change to do Meatless Mondays. It's partnering with them and saying, hey, we're going to promote this to students. Would you mind adding some vegetarian options on Mondays and labeling them? And we'll be outside the dining hall working with you getting students to sign a pledge to eat all vegetarian food on Mondays. And we found that to be incredibly successful. Tons and tons of students are willing to sign up. The dining hall is serving more and more vegetarian food, and that makes them a lot more open to trying stuff in the future, like doing new vegan events and that kind of thing. Outside of that, I would recommend, of course, doing the full cage-free campaign in your dining hall. If you want to chat after this talk, I have a full campaign guide I can give to you, and you guys can get started right away.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, I understand the whole concept of, for example, with the schools trying to get people to take baby steps that eventually will lead to veganism. But one of the campaigns that you talked about, the Johnsonville sausage campaign, one of the slides you had said to ask them to stop the cruelty. So I was wondering, with that particular campaign, how do you expect them to stop cruelty completely unless you're asking them to go out of business? Don't you think that doing this will just allow people to justify their consumption of sausages instead of for them to go vegan eventually?
Right, sure, great question. So obviously, we're a completely vegan organization. Our goal is, the same as yours, I assume. At the end of the day, though, some of these words, like that is a company-facing petition, and using words like cruelty and so forth. Of course, it's not like the companies that don't use gestation crates are no longer cruel and so forth. So why we feel confident that this isn't doing harm or making it more difficult to get people to switch to vegan food if they think that their sausage is compassionate or whatever, is that there's a lot of research out there that shows that if people are doing things like, say, buying cage-free eggs or going to their farmer's market to buy meat because they feel guilty about factory farming, those people are so much more likely to be open to the vegetarian and vegan message, to reduce meat consumption. I mean, just think about yourself, right? If you're talking to someone who already identifies as someone that cares about animals, feels kind of guilty about eating meat, so they try to spend more money to get so-called humane meat or whatever, that person's going to be a lot more open to your message than someone who just doesn't care, someone who's apathetic, eats at McDonald's every day and never thinks twice about it. So that's something that we feel very strongly about. At the end of the day, though, like 99% of our work is directly advocating for veganism with young people. This is just how we win our campaigns, is using that kind of messaging. If you read the language in the petition letter that people sign or send out, we don't imply that sausage is kind in any way, but we're really targeting like the specific gestation crate issue. And I've got to say, as someone, I was very skeptical when I first did a cage-free campaign on my campus. And when you engage with thousands of students gathering signatures, I lose perspective, and I'm sure a lot of us in this room have, because we think about these issues all the time. Most people have never thought about this even once. So when you go to them and you say, this is where like all the eggs in the world come from, are these hellish cages and farms, it's going to blow their mind. Like the students who just gave, like, how is this possible? I can't believe that this is happening. So, people don't like the humane meat argument that, you have to keep in mind it's like 3% of the market. It's something that vegans care very strongly about and infuriates us, and we focus on it so much. Regular people just aren't even on that page. They're not even thinking about like, oh, my food was an animal. So it really does take baby steps a lot of the time. And I really shared your skepticism at first, but working hands-on with a lot of these campaigns, I have seen it really change people. Does that answer your question?
Anybody else? We have one way in the back.
There is some concern about, you're making it seem like, I love the campaign, but when we talk to people about the cruelty, they tend to be turned off of it. Then we bring up the health part of it. They think of veganism as a diet, when it's not really a diet, it's more of an ethical stance against the animals. So if they start using it as a diet, they can still be wearing leather or eating jello the next day, and not looking at it as an animal point of view, but more as I'm eating meat this day and vegetarian that day. How do you approach them so they can learn more about the cruelty instead of just as a diet? Because everybody thinks it's a diet now, and it's not.
Great question. So if I understand correctly, how do we, when some people switch simply because of the next bad diet, it might be paleo the next month or something like that, and so forth. Well, at the Humane League, we try to get into as many classrooms as we can. So often that means we're speaking in environmental science classes. obviously animal cruelty isn't going to be the focus of the message, but we always include, whatever the core of the presentation is, 25 minutes just on the animal cruelty issue. And I think you made a good observation, is that that's the real core way to get people to make a long-term commitment. And the studies really back that up. Recidivism, people who stop being vegetarian and go back to eating meat, those are far more likely going to be people that went vegan for health reasons. The people who went vegan for animal cruelty reasons are far more likely to remain for their lifetime involved in that cause, and more likely to become activists as well. So I think whatever kind of outreach we're doing, it's really good to include that core message. And the fact of the matter is, 98% of the American population feel that animal cruelty is on the same level as cruelty to children. Like, you have to keep in mind, everyone's on our side already, they just don't know it yet. So it's just a matter of getting information about animal cruelty to people, and they're gonna be on our side. That said, I think it's important, at the end of the day, with our Meatless Mondays campaigns and so forth, we really focus on sustainability and healthy kids, because we know that's gonna spin well with the media and with the school system. At the end of the day, whatever makes people change, I'm happy, because it has to be about the animals is the bottom line. But I do agree the most effective way to do that is the animal cruelty message, and that's what we use on campuses and so forth. Does that answer your question? Great, thanks.
Any more questions? I have this gentleman.
Hello, thank you. Yes, you said earlier that there were a large number of studies suggesting that moving towards products that are labeled as cruelty-free leads to a move ultimately towards vegetarian and veganism. And I was just wondering if you could tell me the citations for those studies.
Sure. So there's a blog post from Farm Sanctuary from a few months ago. I just sent actual names for the study off the top of my head on there. I'm happy to email them to you after this talk if you'd like. The ones that I find to be most compelling are one, the studies of all the countries in Europe that have regulations that have banned cage-free, banned battery cages, and specifically labeled these eggs have cages or enriched cages and so forth. Those countries have much higher levels of vegetarianism and veganism, high levels of activism. So we don't see a negative correlation where the more humane the animal products are, the less people care. In fact, we see exactly the opposite. So to me, as someone who's interested in really building an effective movement, I think that that is the most important statistic. The other thing that I noticed is that from our Humane League Lab studies, you can check out our website, humaneleaguelabs.com. We do lots of surveys with statistical analysis, and what we've seen are that people who are now vegan or vegetarian for a time before doing that were purchasing more humane products. And like I said, you just come chat with me at the table after, and I can personally email you some of the studies.
Okay, do we have any others?
I see a lot of parallels between the work you're doing and the work that's gone on over the past 60 years in the tobacco movement. And I'm wondering if just in your training or orientation, do you draw on victories or concepts from movements like that or others that sort of help to predict success?
Sure. So I think that one of the most important things that animal activists can do, because in many ways we're still kind of at the birth of the movement, we're still a small part of the population, a lot of people aren't really tuned into the issue yet, not a lot of awareness, that we really need to look at what has explosive success. So indeed, things like regulation with tobacco, we see groups like COK using that same kind of legal approach of we need to label this as dangerous, we need to sue them if they're being dishonest with their humane labeling and so forth, and that's been a really cost-effective way to hurt the pocketbooks of these companies. One really successful, or two successful movements that we've looked at in the past 10 years are those to make marijuana legal. Has been started as a small grassroots cause, and whether you like it or not, is just an unstoppable powerhouse now. And they use a lot of just grassroots techniques, and you're seeing marijuana legalized or decriminalized all over the country, and it seems like that's inevitable. And the other movement is marriage equality, so seeing the legalization of gay marriage. And again, that's just, think about where we were 10 years ago compared to now. So just one example, in Maine, they looked at California's unsuccessful bid to get gay marriage, and essentially what they were doing in California, there's a great Atlantic article you can look up about this, was running ads of judges and very stern authority figures saying, if you are against, if you're for civil rights, if you're for this, then you have to be for this. and it's a very like authoritative message. And the only county where they didn't do that, there was a small nonprofit that ran a commercial with just an, kind of like an elderly lesbian couple that's just like two sweet grandmas, and they were just talking about the relationship and relating to people and saying, we're just like you, we love each other, we just want to be married, we've been together for 60 years and so forth. And that was the only county that overwhelmingly supported gay marriage. So what Maine did was they brought just tons from around the country, tons of charismatic young gay guys and lesbian women, brought them into town and just had them go on a door knocking campaign and say, hey, I'm just like your kid, except I'm gay and I want to get married too, I'm a nice guy, you know, do you have a minute to chat? And they dominated. It was like a complete reversal as soon as people met someone and said, oh, they're kind of like me. So that's an approach. You know, obviously there's a lot of room for kind of confrontational tactics in advocacy, but in general, we try to use that kind of same approach in our advocacy work to say, hey, listen, we share the same values, we're against animal cruelty, this is what made me switch, you know, we're very similar to each other and so forth, is obviously an effective tactic. So, yeah, and that's just one example.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more.
You've been talking about this topic a lot. I'm wondering about purity versus piecemeal. You've got people like Gary Francione, whatever have
Sure.
you, and Gary Yourofsky. They say, okay, Meatless Monday, that is not good enough. You are saying it's okay to abuse animals some of the time. That's not good enough. You've got to be all or nothing.
Right.
I have trouble arguing with them on that. I like your approach you're doing where every little bit counts. What do you say to these people who say, if you're using dairy, that's worse than meat because these cows are suffering and then they're going to the slaughterhouse?
Right.
So, what do you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I mean, first of all, I know that it saddens me how divided the animal rights movement is on this, because I think that we all have the duty to take the other side very seriously, because the stakes are so high that we have to learn from each other and really address these arguments and think about them and be thoughtful. We can't just dig in, even though it pisses me off sometimes, right? I just want to dig in and be like, you know, screw you guys, like, this is the right way. I try to read all of their books, read their materials, be as thoughtful as possible. And at the end of the day, the reason that I do this kind of work is that because I see the stakes are so high, and we see the evidence of, I mean, like the Meatless Mondays campaign. Regardless of what Gary Francione says, next year, 3.2 million vegetarian meals are going to be served to kids. We're going to have pro-vegetarian posters in their schools. And I don't, you know, do I feel good talking about cage-free eggs to dining directors? Absolutely not, you know. I think there's a lot of propaganda on that side of like, you know, people like me are like these corporate shills and we just do what feels good and we get easy victory. Of course I can, you know, I'm vegan, you know, I had a mohawk in high school, like I get it, I like pissing people off. But at the end of the day, like, if I put myself in the shoes of the animals on these farms, I want to be as like cutthroat and effective as our enemies are. And if you read the trade magazines like I do, if you read the beef and poultry magazines, they don't even know who Gary Francione is. You know who they hate? The Humane Society of the United States, Mercy for Animals, the groups that are digging into their pocketbooks. And like I said before, the evidence in terms of like movements growing with the welfare campaigns and undercover investigations, we see that happening in Europe and we're seeing it in the US as well. And I have yet to see a model based on Gary's work and so forth. There's no real big organized group out there doing a lot of stuff. I mean, there just isn't, you know? And groups like Vegan Outreach, that's all they do. 100% of what they do is go out and talk to people about, you know, this is why you should reduce meat consumption or go vegan or vegetarian. And a lot of abolitionists, so-called, the Gary Francione type people, don't like them either because they're not exactly pure enough. But people don't change overnight. Some do. The vast majority of vegans do it gradually. And to me, we just have to look at the numbers and take a sober look and say, yeah, I'd be more comfortable just telling the truth to people that, you know, you're murdering animals and so forth. But at the end of the day, we have to do what's most effective. All right, well, I think that's it, guys. Thanks again. Awesome.